Hey, one more thing before you go. Adaptation, resilience, and courage. In this episode, we delve into the extraordinary life of a multifaceted individual who has traversed diverse landscapes, both literal and metaphorical. From her experiences in the performing arts to her role as a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, in this conversation, we discover how to find within ourselves that same inspiration, resilience, courage, and unwavering spirit to move through life in a positive way. I'm your host, Michael Hurst. Welcome to One More Thing Before You Go. My guest in this episode is Jo Patti Munisteri. Jo has been described as a unique individual who has lived a different life than most of us. She's been a professional in the performing arts, a teacher, an analyst, a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, a team leader, a mentor, a martial artist, and a writer, sun dancer, and a mother. It's an amazing journey through her life. Jo completed training with the U.S. Army Human Terrain System, chosen as a specialist with the U.S. Department of State, was a project coordinator for USAID Peace Corps, advisor for universities and ministries of education in many parts of the world, including Siberia, Armenia, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. She has survived years of working in remote locations in conflict zones, including Afghanistan, Pakistan, Israel, Iraq, and Ukraine. Jo was invited to work and live with indigenous communities in Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, Northern Africa, and in the USA, most recently in Alaska. She was selected in 2022 as a grantee for a Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions program with plant and animal medicines in Mexico for dealing with post-traumatic reactions. Jo's personal path involves adaptation, resilience, and courage. Her son, Denali Schmidt, and his father, Marty Schmidt, her ex-husband, a former USAF PJ, were killed in K2 in Pakistan in 2013. We're just touch upon that a little bit. In addition, she's lost many colleagues and teammates in many conflict zones. She's a graduate of the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, Massey University in New Zealand, and New Zealand School of Acupuncture and Traditional Chinese Medicine in Wellington. Her new nonfiction book was released earlier this year, Travelers Between Worlds, which features her travels, being a grantee for Veterans Exploring Treatments, and training with the Shaolin in Henan, China, among other locations. Welcome to the show, Jo.
Thank you very much, Michael. Glad to be here.
What an amazing, I've said this before to other people on my podcast and on this show. What an amazing journey, but holy smokes, what an amazing journey that you've had.
Yes, I didn't plan it that way. My life has just turned out that way. And still journeying, so we'll see what happens next.
Well, still journeying is always a good thing. It's kind of one of those. I think when we stop seeking, when we stop discovering, when we stop looking around, I think we tend to kind of couch potato.
Yes, and there's all different ways of looking, inner and outer, depending on your circumstance and your health condition and where you are in life.
I agree, and I think we're going to talk about that a little bit. I love the fact that you have a traditional Chinese medicine background. And I want to delve into that a little bit here in a few, but in the practice of Qigong and some of the other modalities that you use to help manage your health, we both had diagnoses that we were told that we wouldn't do certain things in our life, and we've overcome those obstacles in spite of being told by traditional medicine that it wouldn't work. So, yeah, we got a lot to talk about. We got so much to talk about. So little time, so much. I know that I covered a bunch of some of your background, but I do like to start at the beginning just a little bit. Where did you grow up, please?
That's always a challenging question because we moved 13 times before I was 11 years old. I'm from a first-generation immigrant family. My father was born in Italy, and my mother's family is from Italy. Because of my father's job, we moved. He was in oil and gas. He was a civil engineer. And we moved to Texas finally in 1964. And a lot of my family has stayed in Texas since then. I went to middle school and high school in Texas and then left as soon as I was 18 to go to university. So I had a life of adaptation even growing up, and I think that's helped me. At the time, it was difficult sometimes, changing many schools, different kinds of schools, different kinds of people and cultures to adapt to. But looking back, I think it was one of the best scaffolding for the work I have done.
And I mean, it's amazing because it gave you an opportunity, even as a child, to kind of discover cultures and the different cultures that we have across the world, and how they are different, but they're the same in many ways.
Yes, and my parents had friends from very many different, I would say, immigrant groups. Even when we moved to Houston, we had Iranian friends. We had people who had immigrated from Germany. There were, of course, Hispanic friends. So, yes, I was exposed to different cultures through my grandparents and my parents.
That's amazing. I think, I wish that we as individuals would have grown up. I mean, you had a very unique opportunity. You did from that perspective, but it's too bad that we can't. We all experience some of that to a certain point. I think that understanding other cultures and understanding immigrants and understanding where people have come from and what they've gone through to be where they're at would give us a better understanding of totality, because we're all connected. In my opinion, we're all connected across the universe, and sometimes we forget that. So thank you for experiencing that and then sharing that with the world.
Yes, and I want to add that three-dimensional, human to human contact, we have to have the screen sometimes, and I'm grateful that we have the screens today so we can be in two different places and speak. But I think the rapport building on both an individual and a group level, when you're actually human beings together, there's no substitute for that.
I agree.
And I'm fortunate I've had that experience in many places.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, you've traveled everywhere. I know you went to Georgetown University. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, before we moved to Texas, my grandparents were teachers in Brooklyn public schools after my grandmother came with my father and his sister to the United States. My grandmother was a physicist, but in those days she was working in Italy with Enrico Fermi, and when she came to the United States at the beginning of World War II, she wasn't able to do that, so she switched to teaching. At any rate, she said, I knew I wanted to return to the East Coast for university. And she said, you have to find something that you really enjoy, that you're good at, perfect it, and you'll find a way to get the scholarship in the place you need. So my dad took us out to the track, all of us. I'm the oldest of six. I have four younger brothers and a younger sister. And he had a kind of method of bringing us up. And one of it was, as soon as we could walk, we went to the track. And as soon as we could hold a violin, he started us off on the violin. Then we each branched off into different instruments, except my sister. She continued with the violin. But anyway, and we had to learn at least one or two different languages. So I knew I was in sports in those days. We're talking about the 50s and the 60s. There weren't as many opportunities for girls in sports, biological females in sports. And so I was in the Junior Olympics, and I thought that might be a way to get a scholarship, but I wasn't good enough for that. But fortunately, my middle school teacher enrolled me in a speech contest where I had to learn how to tell a story. And also, I had speech lessons because at the time I had a lisp and a stutter from trauma and things. And that started me on a path. So our Memorial High School in Houston was an excellent school for debate. So when I was 16, I went to nationals with the Catholic Youth Organization, CYO, in Washington, D.C. That's the first time people from Georgetown approached me. I was one of only two females in the finals. And it was in 1969, and by the way, the topic was racism back in 1969. At any rate, I won state, I won nationals. I went to Stanford for nationals my senior year. There were more recruiters, I guess you would say, there. I was only one of, I think, 2 females in the Model United Nations. And I, at that time, wanted to be a human rights commissioner. That was something I aspired to. So when I went to Georgetown University, many, many more opportunities opened up for me and different kinds of trainings. I do talk about that in both my first book, which is nonfiction, Traveling Off the X, and my current book, Traveler Between Worlds.
You know, I have to say this out loud because, you know, my father was a writer, and he introduced me to not only that, but the creative arts as a young child. And I'm always grateful for that. Between the writing, the exploration, the research, in understanding the value of creative arts from performance levels on up, dance, you know, you name it. Unfortunately, in today's society, I think that those type of aspects kind of get pushed down a little bit and don't seem as important as they were way back when. And I'm impressed with the fact that your parents brought you to the utilization of not only musical instruments to understand the connection with music and our mind, body, soul, in the aspect of a multi-language and being able to communicate across the world. Now, I know that you said your father's Italian.
Yes, both my parents are Italian, but my father was born in Italy, different parts of Italy. If you know Italy, it's...
I do.
Okay, so my father's family is from Sicily and Sardinia, and my mother's family is from Naples, so all Southern Italian.
All Southern Italian, that works. So we have relatives in Sicily at the moment, and then we have friends that are in Naples and Rome and in that area. So yeah, I'm very familiar. But yeah, what a brilliant opportunity for you as a young individual to learn, you know, the value of language and the value of music at such a young age. And I'm sure that helped you to really get into your exploration, you know, traveling the world. How'd you get involved in traveling the world?
I will tell you, but first I was going to say, yes, the languages of math and music are universal.
They are.
So that's always been a point of contact for me wherever I went, not even necessarily planning it. It just happened.
It just happened.
And language is the same, you know, especially if you study languages or in countries where you go left to right, right to left. It exercises the brain and neural circuits in a whole different way, opens your mind to different ways of looking at the world. So yes, I'm very grateful to all my ancestry for that.
Yeah, that's an amazing. It's amazing. I smile because that's an amazing opportunity. You know, when I went back to university, I'd always been involved in creative arts aspect of it. But when I really delved into it, when I was at ASU, getting my master's degree, you know, I emphasized my studies on music and dance and performance and the effect of those things on people with healing. And
Yes.
how music and dance are universal languages across the world. No matter where you're at, you know, music starts, people dance. It doesn't matter where you've come from or who you are, what race you are, what religion you are. It doesn't matter. That music and dance inspires people. And they dance together. They'll sing together. You know, it's exciting. I'm sorry. It's just exciting.
This is some of the best parts of being a human being, is doing that with other people.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, I agree. Now I forgot my other question. What got you involved in? Well, let me back it up and ask you this. I know that you've traveled the world. You've gone all over the place. The coming from an individual that was in the military, I'd not heard of the vet program down in Mexico. At what point did you get involved with that in the use of plant? Here we go.
Well, it's called medicines. That's very recent. And my ex-husband, we were divorced before he died, was a Special Operations U.S. Air Force PJ. And I worked with a special program with the U.S. Army. I was trained at Fort Leavenworth in preparation for deployment for Afghanistan, and then worked in support of NATO. I was a team leader at VTED and NKC in Kabul. I was in Afghanistan on and off for 3 years between 2014 and 2017, and then in Iraq until 2020. Through other veterans in different branches, I actually learned about this because I was experiencing post-trauma reactions. That was actually my specialty in Chinese medicine. And during the COVID restriction years, I was in remote Alaska from March 2020 until 2021, September 2021. And I, for a lot of reasons, which I describe in my second book, I decided I needed some help navigating this. The nightmares were coming back from, I experienced some pretty firsthand difficult trauma, teammates being killed, being in situations where I couldn't do anything because I was embedded in the civilian population, but I saw things that were just absolutely horrific, especially against girls, women, and children. So luckily I got a grant from a very, very worthwhile organization, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, which was started by Marcus and Amber Capone. Marcus was a Navy SEAL, and you can look them up. They do give grants right now for special operations community, whether it's the veteran or veteran spouse. They work with the families too. And right now, unfortunately, iboga and different plant and Sonoran toad medicine, animal medicine, are not legal yet in the United States for therapeutic reasons. So we had to go down to Mexico, which they did. They do sponsor people to go. I was one of the people, I believe, at the time, which was in 2022, I believe I was the oldest person. They were joking. We were joking that maybe they thought they couldn't teach old dogs new tricks. But I really benefited from it. I can tell it's not even been quite 2 years, but especially the first year, your neural circuits are rejuvenated and you see a lot of things in a whole different way. And they have a very good preparation and integration after it with a number of other organizations they work with, including Ambio.
Yeah, that's an amazing, post-traumatic stress is an issue that really needs to be addressed more diligently, I believe, within the community, not only for law enforcement, for soldiers, but anybody in law enforcement, firefighters, EMTs, doctors, and people like you that have traveled the world, worked in the situations and in the conflict areas that you've worked in, that sometimes the society forgets that what you see and what you experience doesn't just go away. It's something that, is embedded within your brain and your eyes and your soul. It's embedded in your heart. So my heart goes out to you for that. I do understand PTSD from a different perspective. Mine as a police officer in my situation when I got injured and so forth. So I do understand that to a point. So my heart goes out to you in that regard. I'm glad that you're on a positive journey with healing with that and helping others to do the same.
Yes, many people can have post-trauma reactions, which is what I prefer to call it, and what health practitioners in many other parts of the world don't call it a disorder. That's the United States medical establishment that calls it a disorder. I do have published papers in peer-reviewed journals about that, in fact. They're reactions to extreme situations, and they manifest in different ways. And you go through, as I did, many years where it doesn't affect you in certain ways, and then at a certain point, you may not expect that maybe even it's something not as traumatic. I think in my case, what often came back was what I couldn't do. So you don't always know. You can go, as I say, for 10 or 15 years and nothing's
up. Yeah.
about you, and then something relatively minor will trigger that, and it's important to look at that. And I was very concerned. Had people I know committed suicide, veterans in our program committed suicide in the human train system after they returned. So it's a very important part of integrating health. And I just came back from Israel, where, of course, I would say the whole country is in post-trauma. And I realized how much this work with vets had helped, because I was able to, again, be in some situations with people, and I felt fine, actually. I felt stronger.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. That's, you know, I always try to refer to it as post-traumatic stress, in understanding that through many, many conversations I've had within this program, actually, and some of my own treatments, and understanding post-traumatic stress can happen in many different situations, and that it affects people. Like you said, it just pops up at times and things like that. I was not ever in a war zone type thing, but I had 5 suicides I investigated between Christmas Eve and Christmas Day one year. You know, and that still affects me to this day when certain things come on TV. Just as an example, certain things will come on TV and something will pop up, and you know, I get quiet and maybe a tear drops or something, and my wife has to say what, you know, she understands. But, you know, those kind of things come back. I work domestic violence task force, not just domestic violence, but a task force where we do the worst of the worst. Not that any domestic violence is good. All of it's bad. But we as a task force, as a multi-agency task force, we worked the worst of the worst. So, you know, those kind of things. I'm only saying this out loud because those of you that are watching and listening, you know, it can happen to you in many, many different situations. You don't have to be in a war zone to have post-traumatic stress. It can be, you know, a situation that you've gone through in life that brings you to a point that you could be sexual assault, it could be domestic violence, it could be an assault, a traffic accident, it could be many, many things. And to recognize that, you know, there are opportunities for you to get help for that. So, just a quick note.
Yes.
What got you interested in traditional Chinese medicine?
Well, I was in the performing arts after Georgetown, and after traveling through a grant from the Circumnavigators Fellowship. I was dropped behind the Iron Curtain, my first book. And coming back, I decided I didn't want to go into the Foreign Service or work for the government. I wanted to pursue the performing arts. I'd been dancing since I was 3. I started out in ballet, classical training, and then went on to modern and jazz. And I applied to Circle in the Square Professional Performing Arts School in Manhattan, and I got in after auditions, and I made it through the 2 years. They used to anyway, cut at least half the class after the first year. And then I was in the performing arts. I worked a lot in theater. That was my first love, but some television and minor parts and extras in films and things. And this was before Giuliani in the 70s in New York. It was quite dangerous, and like most performing artists. And I was writing then. I've always been a poet. I was coming back from working. I worked at the Olive Tree downtown in New York on Bleecker and McDougal Street. And going to the subway, I got attacked. And I was supposed to do a new show in Delaware in a few weeks. Anyway, one of my Chinese American actress friends suggested that I go try Chinese medicine in Chinatown. And that was really in the rabbit warrens of Chinatown in those days. And because the conventional doctors said, oh, you're going to have to take these painkillers, which made it difficult for me to memorize my lines, and that it was going to be a long time before I recovered from neck injury and balance injury. So that's how I started. I started in Chinatown knowing about this. And then I went to a Chinese woman practitioner, and she told me, she did stems and branches and other things. Anyway, she said, you know, you should think about becoming a practitioner yourself. That was a long time before I actually went to study it. But that was my initial introduction to Chinese medicine in my 20s.
Unique opportunity to get introduced to that. I've used, and we had this conversation right before we started, and I love traditional Chinese medicine. It has helped me get off of 9 different drugs that they have me on for my rheumatoid arthritis and some other issues and things like that. It helped me to manage my disease. It helps me to, because I'm never going to go away, obviously, but I can at least manage it from that perspective. And I love acupuncture, and I love the herbs and everything about it completely. I know that you went to China actually and got involved with learning from the monks in China. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, before that, I mean, my journey with Chinese medicine has been almost 50 years now.
Wow.
I mean, yes, starting with martial arts and learning a little about acupuncture, and then learning about auricular acupuncture. It's called the NADA protocol. I did one of my rotations in Lincoln Hospital in the Bronx when they used to have it there for police officers, in fact, and first responders, as a way to deal with stress and addictions without the use of pharmaceutical drugs. I talk about this in my book. It's been a long path to get to China, which I finally did in 2018-19. But I went to New Zealand School of Chinese Medicine and Acupuncture under Olatunji in the early 2000s. So I got my formal credentials, because you had to study Western medicine as well, which is very useful. Mm-hmm. And then finally in 2018 and 2019, when I had a break, I was supposed to go back to Iraq for a new university in Baghdad, which kept getting stalled to be open. And I thought, this is my chance to go to China. So through my Chinese colleagues in the United States, they advised me where to go, not to go to the tourist place, to go way up in the mountains, and recovering from injuries, to go in the winter training, which was counterintuitive in a way, because you don't have any heat. It's very austere conditions. But it was the best thing I did. It just gave me a whole new lease on life. And I have tremendous, tremendous respect for the Shaolin, it's increasingly difficult for them to exist under the current government.
Which is unfortunate. Yeah, look at that. Those traditions go back to what, 5 or 6,000 years?
Yes.
Long, long time ago. And unfortunately, they're being sequestered and erased, and it's just not good.
Yes, because they're independent, and they have a long history of both helping the emperors and then being betrayed by the emperors. And with all the new surveillance technology, it makes it more difficult for them to stay under the radar.
Yeah, I would imagine. I hadn't thought about that. I guess that would be more difficult.
It was there before they had the cameras installed by the government, and then during the time and after they were installed under Xi Jinping, starting in February 2019.
Yeah, that's too bad. That's really too bad. Is that where you were introduced to Qigong?
No. I was introduced to Qigong much earlier on, maybe 20 years before. There's a whole study and separate category, I guess you'd say, of Chinese medicine, medical Qigong. It's not much known in the West. It's very specific. I had excellent teachers that originally came from China and escaped from China that were in New Zealand, that were at the New Zealand School of Acupuncture and TCM at that time under Olatunji. As one of them had been in iron shirt with the Shaolin since he was 9 years old. So for different organs, there are different movements. For different conditions, different movements. A lot of people in the West just want a pill or want to be passive in their healing. And it's a much more, more activity is required, concentration and focus. But it's without the use of herbs or needles.
Yeah, I find it interesting when I went to get my first. I've had 8 operations, as most of my viewers, listeners that have learned about me. But in my first knee replacement, basically I was able to heal in the hospital. I refused to take the Vicodin and everything else that they had given me. My wife would come in. She was trained on where to put. I've got I'm not a tattoo guy, but I've got 30 little dots tattooed all over. And she would come in and give me acupuncture treatments. And I was off my cane, off of everything, and walking independently in 5 weeks after my first replacement. 6 weeks after my first replacement, then 5 weeks after my right knee, and 5 weeks after my hip replacement. And I attribute that to acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, and Qigong, because I would do that for balance and do that to get my strength back and to really understand it. Not as in depth, I learned here in the United States, but what I've learned is a valuable asset to health, and into being able to do it more from a natural perspective and understanding the mind, body, soul connection. It gave me that opportunity to be able to do that. I'm kind of jealous that you got to go there. Just a little.
Well, Ola Tunji always said, who was the director in New Zealand and who had studied in China much earlier. He was originally from Chicago. His family was from the West Indies, I believe. Amazing guy. He's passed on now, unfortunately. But he always said, it's a marriage of Western medicine and Eastern medicine. I also had some very serious injuries and had to have my glenoid process to my elbow is cobalt chromium now instead of my usual bones. So great respect, and we're fortunate in the United States to have both, excellent medicine and Eastern medicine. And for different people, different modalities and therapeutics serve differently.
Yeah.
It's good that we have a choice of both, but I find for our own bodies to heal and for less, or in some cases, no adverse side effects, I've used Chinese medicine as often as I can.
Me too. I'm with you. Yes, I am. May I ask, I know that you lost your ex-husband and your son
Yes.
in a climbing accident, I'm assuming.
Yes. After Marty, my husband, was in the PJs, he became internationally known mountain guide and guided people up all of the world's highest mountains. It was his third time attempting K2, and he took our son. Really wasn't... He was an artist. He was an excellent athlete, but he had never done any 8,000-meter peaks before. It's a very tragic story. So we're not sure exactly how they died or even exactly when they died. Their bodies have never been found, but they died somewhere between the Chinese side of K2, either the 27th or the 28th of July, 2013.
I'm sorry for your loss. In regard to that, what have you done, or is there anything that you've done that you could recommend to other people that have helped you to manage the grief and the loss?
Yes, a lot of strategies and changes over the years. I think the first 2 years, probably my daughter would say the same, because my daughter's still alive, fortunately. My son he died perished when he was 25, just had finished his BFA in California College of the Arts. He was an emerging artist in all mediums. And he was a light in our lives, and I know he wouldn't want us to stop our lives or become so desperate after his death. So part of the way I've done it, especially in the last few years, is I incorporate, and my daughter and I, and my mother when she was alive, because she was an editor, we put together a book that he actually had wrote as part of his senior high school project. Went to Waldorf schools all the way through, and I was a Waldorf teacher, and it's called Zen and the Art of Skiing. And he was way ahead of his time, mature for his age. And then I used his paintings as covers for my poetry book. This is Clash, Poems from Conflict Zones. And also his photographs. He was an excellent photographer and videographer. This is a photograph that he did on Mount Rainier as my cover for this book, my newest book, Traveler Between Worlds. And I use his photos of me. This is a photo he took of us in Armenia when he came to visit me when I was working there. So I try to keep, and my daughter, we try to keep his especially life and way of life alive with our expressions through art and through keeping healthy, and if as much as possible supporting those we believe, especially in the arts, that Denali would have liked as well. We support some artists and some schools. Those are some of the ways. I would say the other way is for me, acupuncture and physical activity, be it qigong or dance or even hiking, swimming, all of those things help me. I particularly like swimming. I just find it an ease of the body and mind. I can swim in the water, and then part of me swims in the air, in the spirit world in a way. I think you have to find your own way. I won't mince words here. I don't think you ever get over it per se. I think you just navigate through, and it's the best analogy I've thought of is when it first happens, it's like you're simultaneously your skin is ripped off, and then you have to put on this heavy coat that you don't think you can even walk with. And over the years, you manage to get stronger and walk with this coat, but you can never take it off. You just learn to adapt. And the same with my colleagues who were killed and other members of my family who died and died early, especially. It's very different than watching someone die at the end of their life, like I did with my father, for example.
Very much so. It's interesting. Death. We all know that we have to die at some point in our life. Sometimes when somebody's taken too soon, it has a profound impact on our lives in one way or another. And I think we, as an individual, have a choice. If we want to manage that grief, and as you said, you can never. My father died. I was 17 years old. I hadn't seen him since I was 15 years old, and he was only 39 at the time. And that has left an impact on me all of my life, even though I've worked through that. Mm-hmm. So I agree with you. I think that it never really goes away. We've learned to manage it. We've learned to understand it. We've learned to navigate it. I love those words that you said with navigating it, because I think navigating is an important factor. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's easier to navigate than to push it down and hide it, or to think we can forget about it. Because navigating it at least allows us to be able to really understand that we still love that individual, we still miss that individual, but it's fine that they're gone and moved on to another place.
Yes. Part of the reason I wrote my first book, Traveling Off the X, is because my good friend and teammate, we went through Army training together. We were in a number of places together. We were working on a project in the field in Kabul when she was assassinated. And a number of other of my colleagues, mostly women, who most people will never hear about, and who were murdered or who were in situations where their life was ended too soon. She was only 37, Lisa Marie Akbari. So that's another way to sort through the grief, is so that they are remembered and known by other people. It depends also on your faith and your belief in powers higher than human beings and where we go after. I don't know about you and your injuries, but I've had a near-death experience, not so long, I guess about 7 months before my son and his father perished on K2, in which I saw a lot of what was going to happen in my life. At the time, I didn't know it, but now I do. And also realizing that there's not other levels of consciousness. And if you don't have any sort of faith, I think it would be a lot harder to get through.
I agree. It's interesting. That's what, actually, one more thing before you go, is born from that possibility of what exists on the other side and what exists past and beyond where we're at in today's life and what we do here and how we make an impact here and that we can continue to do so even from another realm or another side. You can't, people can't see me with this is my Italian hands. I'm not as Italian. Yeah, I'm not as Italian as you, but I got about 18%, so I'm close. I'm a little there, and it all comes out in my hands. So yeah, I respect where your position in regard to that. I think that we all have an opportunity to understand that we can do good in this life, and we have opportunities to come back and do it again. You know, from my perspective, I think that we can come back and do it again and continue to make an impact from people. Had you always wanted to be an author?
I've always author. My daughter will correct me on this because she's a publisher. She has her own publishing firm, D'Angelo Publications. They publish all kinds of books independently. She's also an entrepreneur. I've always written as a way to, like my son always was drawing since he was 2-3 years old. I was always writing. I had my first poem published when I was 9 or 10 in New York, in the New York Times.
That's brilliant.
A part of school children thing about spring. Anyway, I would write even if I wasn't published, but it is gratifying to see your work published well. So I write. Most of my writing that's published online now and in journals is technical writing, either about health or I do geopolitical analysis. I have a Substack. I've been published in Small Wars Journal, Real Clear Defense. I've been published in many countries in English. So yes, writing is a way for me to express and also to work things out analytically, not just thinking in an interior way, but putting it down on paper and then seeing it, then detaching from it a bit and then coming back, especially about important decisions.
That's a good thing. I love writing. I told you my father was a writer, and he instilled upon me at a very early age. I had a typewriter when I was like 7 years old.
Wow.
Typing on the typewriter kind of a thing, and creating and stories and, you know, things like that. So he taught me the value of words and the written word. You know, here I'm down here doing this. I'm looking down like I'm doing this all over again. People can't see that. But yeah, that's pretty cool. Who or what inspired you to publish a book, like your first book?
That was my daughter. I'd been published in magazines and journals, and as I say, online technical writing. But after, we lost half our family in one day, and I guess it was a couple of years later, she wrote a book. She's written 2 nonfiction books about her journeys. One is Journey of Heart, and the other is Changing Gears, about going back to New Zealand. My children were born in, my son was born in Australia, and my daughter was born in New Zealand. So we have a long connection to Oceania. So she encouraged me for my first poetry book, and then a number of people, which I talk about in this book. I look back over the years because most of these people have died in the last few years. Died, quote unquote, due to COVID or as a result of COVID treatment. People in their 20s and 30s might think early 60s is old, but honestly, many people live much longer than that. And so some people I thought would be still alive are not. I write about them in the book, and they kept saying, keep writing. And my Chinese medical doctor colleague for very many years, Dr. Shen, he always tells me, because, you go in for a tune-up or exchange treatments, and one of the things he always says is keep writing.
I think journaling, anything along that line, I do believe that it allows us to, kind of put down on paper what we might be pushing down inside. It allows us an outlet.
Yes, even the kinesthetic act of doing it is much different than keyboarding. And because he had come from China himself, and he advised me before going to Hunan province in China, and he knew all my injuries and so forth, he really encourages me to write about China, because I'm one of the few people really who have written about it so recently and who stayed longer than a month or so. You know, my whole journey there was about 6 months.
Well, plus you also have a perspective from the Western, you know, coming from the West, you have a different perspective in understanding when you go into there with open eyes and open ears and open heart to really kind of see and observe what really is going on behind the lines.
I was very privileged. I talk about it in Traveler Between Worlds because I ended up being part of that community in a different way than just a trainee because of certain incidents that had happened that I was called on to be a health practitioner, and I was able to even go in different schools there in the towns. Yeah, I've been very lucky in many places, including just coming back from Israel and being able to be guided by someone who had the connections to go to the kibbutzes right on the North Gaza border and right on the northern border of Syria and Lebanon.
From that perspective, the book, The Travelers Between Worlds, is a very intriguing title. How did that come about?
It's been a theme during different times of my life. We don't have time to talk about it now, and I do talk about it a little bit in the book. I was a sun dancer, and with this Lakota and Menominee especially, but also intertribal for over 12 years. And that's, and Chief Archie Fire Lame Deer and his family, they are not part of the Native American Church, but I also knew the Crow Dogs who are part of the Native American Church. And that's a different kind of traveling. That's traveling in different realms, different consciousness. And so early on, I talked about it as traveling between worlds. And then also a number of my colleagues, including my roommate on Kaya, she was Afghan-American, married to a Marine, Shala Hammond. She's also passed away in 2018 on Kaya. You know, those of us who have come from 2 or 3 different cultures, you know, she talked about it that when she's in Afghanistan, she feels more American. When she's back in America, she felt more Afghani. Sometimes when I go to Italy, I feel more American. But then growing up in certain parts, especially in Brooklyn and areas, I felt more Italian. You're between worlds in many respects. So that's why I decided on the title.
That's a great title. What's in the book?
There's a few words and pictures.
There's a few words and pictures. A little Italian from the South, a little Brooklyn Italian. Just a little.
Well, I can tell you that truly, and why I have the 2 posters, pull-ups behind me, and the 2 books here, is because they really go together. After I wrote the first one, a lot of people said, we need to know more. And also I had stopped the first one at about 2016, and a lot had happened between 2016 and 2023. So it's a mosaic. It goes from very little about my childhood. It's more about starting when I was at Georgetown and dropped behind the Iron Curtain essentially when I was 20, which started my international career in a way at the time I didn't know. And also about special programs I was in at Georgetown and other organizations, which I had to be careful of about my NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. And I was longer away from some of them for the second book, so I could talk more about some of those programs. I still can't ever talk about some of them because the NDAs I signed, especially since 2008, they're much different than the ones before. So it spans, there's 186 countries, so I've been to 67, I believe, and working. But if you just look at the table of contents on Amazon or Barnes and Nobles, you can see the range. I've also been privileged to work on places like Ascension Island in the South Atlantic off the coast of Africa, which is essentially just a military base, US, UK. And also talk about places like Siberia, where I worked in universities there, 10 universities I was responsible for, but based out of Novosibirsk State Technical University in 2011, 2012, Pakistan, Ukraine after Maidan in 2015 with a new program. So and most of the photos there I was given permission to take, especially in China. Fortunately, the Shifus gave me certain permission, and in Siberia. There are a few other people took. My teammate Lisa Marie Akbari took some, Shala took some, but they're mostly just a human being, no AI. I wrote the books, I took the photos, and I had a lot of help putting it together, formatting, and my son's, as I say, my son's paintings and photos are in them too.
Would you consider it in more autobiographical? Let me try that in English.
Autobiographical?
Thank you very much. I haven't had enough caffeine or something. My tongue is still twisted.
It's quite all right. Definitely autobiographical. Yeah, it's firsthand. It's not secondhand.
Which is great. I think that people would have an opportunity to kind of walk in your shoes from this perspective and get a better understanding of the different cultures that you've been in, the different conflicts that you've been in, the different societies that you've been in, and how, again, I think, we all have commonalities, but we also have differences that, we need to recognize both. And does this book help us recognize both?
I believe so. And of course, I'm not so objective, but I did have some other reviewers who didn't even know me point that out. And I was cheered to say that they felt uplifted and knowing more after reading my books.
Very cool.
And that's part of the reason I wrote them. Of course, it's from my perspective or other people I knew's perspective. But I wish I had also had books like these before I went on some of my projects. A lot of books are written by journalists who aren't really often living there or know the languages, or they're written by military, especially about conflict zones, Western military. But not very many are written by people who actually work in humanitarian and live there and have that perspective.
It's more of a on the ground, in the middle of, and experiencing with them, not just as an observer from the outside. So I respect that. I think that it gives us a better opportunity to have an understanding of what exists. I mean, my whole program's about that. What exists, not just.
I hope so, because most people, not all, certainly not all, especially with what's going on in the Middle East and some other areas, want to live in peace, want their children to grow up, want their children to be educated and healthy. Those are the similarities of most, but not all, people on the earth that I've had contact with.
Well, and I think that I haven't read it yet, but I plan on reading it. I like talking about your journey and getting to where you wrote the book and why you wrote the book and things like this.
It's on Audible, too, for people who have a hard time. I know they're both over 350 pages, so I did record the second one, and Defiance Press of Texas, an independent press, published Traveling Off the X, and they hired a professional actress who did a good job for the Audible of that.
And Audible for that perspective.
Also, I read my own poems. I recorded it for a clash.
Very cool.
There's some funny parts of dark humor. It's not PC, but I think you'll enjoy them.
It's those of us that have been in arenas in life that allow us to have a dark side of humor. That's fantastic. Could you please help us understand how we can find your books? And I know that you provide services as well. And I know you have a website. And you don't have a podcast, do you?
No. Maybe later in life. I actually started out in radio in my 20s. I worked for WGTB-FM, and I have my third-class radio engineering license from New York. That was a difficult test in those days. You could only bring in a slide rule, no calculators. Anyway, maybe, but honestly, I still travel and work and consult. So I think one of the best things about people who do consistent podcasts is you can look forward to every week or every 2 weeks. I'm not ready to do that yet, but my website is JoPattiX, JoPattix.com. It's a DIY website, but it has everything on there. It has links to my articles, my books, has some reviews, some trailers, some photos that won't be in the books are there. And I reluctantly, especially considering I was a quiet professional for as long as I could be, till all the social media became de rigueur for publishing your books and podcasts, right? So I'm on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Getter, and Connect Zing.
And I will have links to all of those in the show notes, except the last one. I don't think I have a way of doing that unless I put it in the show notes themselves, but the webpage will.
It was started by a former Navy SEAL, formerly from Poland, Drago. And it's a small platform right now, but I do patronize it, and I appreciate it's a closer community than these big social media platforms.
Oh, very cool. Very, very, very cool. I'll make sure all of us in the show notes so that people have a way to get in touch with you just by pressing a button and get to you. But Jo, thank you very much. It's been like fantastic and amazing to meet you. It's been a pleasure to meet you and to get your journey. I mean, again, I've had 450 conversations on my podcast. And I say this, but I really, really deep down, what an amazing life that you have led, and being able to share that with the world. What a gift! So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing that journey with us. And I look forward to having another conversation with you down the road.
I hope so. Thank you, Michael.
Don't go away yet. This is one more thing before you go. So
right.
I always ask. Because it's one more thing before you go, do you have any words of wisdom you can share with everybody?
What comes to mind is just silence. There's such a poverty of silence, both visually and audio, that you try and find the silence to get your guidance.
That's brilliant, actually. That's brilliant. I don't think we take enough time to stop and listen to nothing. Listen to the birds. Listen to the air. Listen to the trees rustle in the wind. Very cool. Jo, again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on board. Again, look forward to another one. And for everyone else out there, one more thing before you all go, have a great day, have a great week, and thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of One More Thing Before You Go. Check out our website at beforeyougopodcast.com. You can find us as well as subscribe to the program and rate us on your favorite podcast listening platform.